Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, ladies and a couple of gentlemen, very few. Thank you very much. After spending a long day at school, you are here to discuss and to talk about a few interesting ideas. And let me thank, in the very beginning, our facilitator today, who is here to discuss about the power of collaboration, the power of dialogue, and power of exchanging experiences. Mr. Lee Davis, Deputy Director, Cambridge International, is here with us. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. And we're also thankful to the Cambridge team in Pakistan, Mr. Shahid Ashraf, for organizing this event, and Ms. Tabinda for extending her support to make this event possible. As you can see, a title is just flashed in front of us. And soon we are going to share our ideas on it. But we must understand the significance of this event, like the event itself and the event when it is happening. The kind of experience colleagues we have in TCS now was never before. We are celebrating 40th year of our presence in the education sector. And perhaps this is the best time to take a further step in the right direction. And to talk more about this power of collaboration, may I invite our GM Studies, Ms. Zeba Shoaib, to please come over the stage and discuss about the ideas of today. Please, thank you very much.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everybody. I'm not going to take a long time speaking to you to start off with, but I'm just going to take a few minutes to put into context what we mean by learning communities and why this idea has been been floating around in my mind for a while. And the reason is that when I arrived here, which seems like ages ago, but was in January, I met a lot of you and came across some extremely talented people. And there was lots and lots of good practice going around everywhere that I saw. And I was then given the task of kind of making studies even better than it already is in City School. So, and I realised that I had a mammoth task on my hand, because when I talk about communities, there are loads of us. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is talk to you today to try and put into context why learning communities, to me, I think is important. And that's simply because the purpose of communities is people working together and sharing best practice and learning from each other. This morning I was talking to Lee, and I was telling him, he was asking me about my background, because whether I like it or not, my accent always gives me away. So, and I said to Lee this morning as well that I'm actually learning more from everybody in this room than they are from me. And I genuinely mean that. So the context of learning communities is basically educational professionals getting together and making teaching and learning the best it can possibly be in our classrooms. And when I talk about teaching and learning communities, I don't mean our high-flying principles, I don't mean GM Studies, I mean people who are passionate about education, so like people like yourselves, people that are working in your schools. They might be new to education, to teaching, but they might have some really brilliant ideas. And those are the types of people that I would expect to be part of a teaching and learning community within City School. So that's kind of the context, and that's the kind of the reason for it. What it will kind of be and where we will be in 6 months' time, I'm quite excited by, because I think City School, certainly in the southern region, will be a very different picture than what it is now, because it's already different from when I first arrived, and it's only going to get better. That I can guarantee you. So I'd like to invite Lee, if I may, now onto the stage, and he's going to give you an introduction. Lee, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Do I have to adjust these? Okay, how's that? There we are. Okay. First of all, before I start, can I just get a sense of who is in the room, please? And I'd like to do that by understanding geography. So if you are from, or if your school is based in Karachi, can you just put your hand up, please? And if you are sort of within the sort of outskirts of Karachi more, so if you're sort of, let's say, within the 5-mile radius of Karachi? Nobody. So you're all based in Karachi, is that right?
No, there's one exception.
One exception. Who is that? Welcome, sir. How far have you come?
See, I'm looking after the upper Mehran network. It's a part of Sindh province.
Mm-hmm.
So, you like measured in kilometers, will be like 300, 400 kilometers away from.
Okay, so, all right. So you've just illustrated a point for me in terms of how easy it's going to be for you to actually get together with the rest of your colleagues. But welcome this afternoon anyway, and hopefully what we're going to talk about this afternoon is going to be of resonance to you. It's going to actually give you a sense, some of the things to think about at least in your context as well. But for the rest of you then, actually it's very encouraging because you're all close to one another, and hopefully it means that you can come together, and more importantly your teachers can come together to do some of the things that we're going to be talking about this afternoon. Now, a little bit of context or a little bit of background from me. So, as the introduction said, my name is Lee Davis. I'm Deputy Director for Education at Cambridge. I've been with Cambridge for 3 years. Before that, I opened a school for the Aga Khan Development Network, actually, in East Africa, in Maputo. I was there for 5 years. And goodness me, isn't it difficult to run a school? It is not easy, is it? The challenges you face on a daily basis, whether that's security, whether that's problems with parents, whether that's issues with student behavior, whether that's teachers doing things that they shouldn't be doing, etc., etc., etc. It's really hard, really hard. So you have all my understanding, all my sympathy, all my appreciation for what you do. Now, what that means, therefore, is that actually we need to help one another and support one another. And that's really the basis of professional learning communities. And I just want to share with you a couple of things that we have done in the past, or I've been part of in the past, which may have, again, strike a chord with you in terms of your own context and the things that you're faced here. The first is I'm going to take you back to when I was Director of Studies at a school in Argentina. This is many, many years ago now. And what we did was we had this big question in front of us: how do we improve the quality of teaching and learning in our schools? And we were part of a group of schools called the Latin American Heads Conference in Argentina, but more broadly in Latin America. And what we established were a series of standards against which we would measure our schools, and we created what's called a peer review model. Okay, so this wasn't an inspection model by any means. This was senior leadership from one school going into another school and looking at evidence against the standards that we had created as a group, and said, okay, we think we're seeing this in your schools, and this is great. We think this potentially is a weakness, so perhaps we need to, or you need to consider this. What was good about the model was that A, we had agreed on the framework, and B, we went in a non-threatening way. So it wasn't a question of you're pointing at something and saying that's wrong, that's bad. But actually what it was saying, okay, look, we can see evidence of this happening, and do you think it's a priority for you in your school improvement planning process thereafter? So that was one thing. The other thing is what we've been establishing in Cambridge over the 3 years that I've been with the organisation, and that's our programme leader communities around our professional development qualifications. And I know that City School have just started down this process yourselves in terms of establishing an embedded and sustained school-based programme of professional development. And this is hard as well. This is not easy. This isn't just sending a teacher off to a workshop and then coming back with new learning and thinking and hoping that that would actually be implemented. But actually this is about understanding, okay, what do we need to do in terms of making a difference to our young people? What are the teaching practices that we need to put in place to do that? And of course, how do we evaluate it? How do we make it sort of, how do we make a judgment on how well we've done in that process? And what we're doing, of course, now is we're getting people together, again, under the framework this time of our professional development qualifications. But this time it's about actually getting into the classroom itself in much more detail, and those people who are leading these programs coming together, sharing good practice, and going from there. So that's the sort of background that we have in terms of, or I have in terms of establishing professional learning communities. You can do this, this is possible, but of course you've got to agree on the framework, you've got to agree on the glue that sort of binds you together, if you like, and you've got to agree on the process, how this is going to actually work. And so what you're going to hear now is a presentation from Zeba, which is again sort of a collection of her thoughts on this, and you're going to hear from me some sort of a critical analysis, if you like, or some further questions that I'd like you to consider as you go through it. So how does that sound? Okay.
Okay, so learning and teaching policy, I'm sure you know all this, especially the policies like the back of your hand, because I'm sure it's your probably best bedtime reading. So learning and teaching policy, what does it tell us? It tells us that the basic message is that teachers must know how to teach. Quite a simple phrase really, but an important phrase, because if our teachers don't know how to teach, then we're struggling. And don't forget, I think one of the things that kind of amazed me when I first arrived here was that when I go back to thinking about how I was trained as a teacher, I had to do a year as a PGC student, and then a year as a newly qualified teacher in a school, and then I was actually given responsibility as a fully trained teacher. So it was almost a 2-year process. And some of our teachers come to us in our schools having had very little training or no training at all, and we expect them to be in the classroom day in, day out, teaching our students and teaching them to the best of their ability without actually giving them a toolkit for teaching. I can still remember the very first day that I stood up in front of the class, in a classroom full of students on my own, knowing that that was it. There wasn't anybody there to observe me, nobody there to help me, and it was quite frightening. So I do sometimes think how teachers that are joining us for the first time, having had no or very little training, how do they feel? So I think it is important that teachers must know how to teach. And it's the primary responsibility of heads to ensure that all teachers understand. Heads, we've just said, have a massive responsibility. You know, those of you that are principal or heads of schools, your job never stops. You know, Simon works every Saturday, every Sunday, and I know that because I see him working, and I'm sure he's no exception, that you're always working all the time. And constantly you're trying to do the best for your schools. And to understand these key principles and have the practical skills to teach for effective learning, because that's what we're trying to achieve, effective learning in the classroom.
Do you have your own theory of learning that you can articulate for a parent or a teacher or a student who comes into your office? Are you able to do that? To articulate your own theory of learning? Can you do that? And if so, do you want to just spend a moment explaining to the person sitting next to you what your theory of learning is? How do people best learn? Are you able to articulate your theory of learning to the person sitting next to you? Does anybody want to share?